My boss mocked my pregnancy, so I took his job while on maternity leave. They thought they had broken me. It's a Tuesday morning, and I'm sitting in the boardroom of Morrison Financial Solutions, 8 months pregnant, watching my former boss squirm. In his seat as the new CEO, me, announces the company's acquisition by my firm. The same man who called me a liability was now begging to keep his job. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how a single cruel comment led to the sweetest revenge I've ever tasted. Welcome to Revenge Treats, where we serve up stories of ultimate payback. My name is Sarah. I'm 32 years old, and for 6 grueling years, I believed that if I just worked hard enough at Morrison Financial Solutions, sacrificed enough of my personal life, and proved my worth over and over again, I'd finally get the respect and promotion I deserved. I couldn't have been more wrong, and that miscalculation nearly cost me everything, until I turned it into the greatest opportunity of my life. Have you ever been so underestimated that people forgot you had claws? Have you ever plotted a little revenge, even if only in your head? Let me know in the comments. And don't forget to smash that like button and subscribe to Revenge Treats for more satisfying stories of justice served ice cold. Let me paint you a detailed picture of my life at Morrison Financial Solutions, because you need to understand just how deep my dedication ran and how spectacularly I was being exploited. Morrison Financial wasn't just any investment firm. Founded in 1987 by Richard Morrison Sr., it had grown into a mid-tier wealth management company handling over $800 million in assets. When I started there, fresh out of Northwestern with my MBA in 2017, I thought I'd landed my dream job. The salary was decent, the office was prestigious, and I was hungry to prove myself in the cutthroat world of financial planning. My official title was portfolio analyst, but within 6 months I was handling responsibilities that should have belonged to someone 3 levels above me. I wasn't just analyzing portfolios, I was building them from scratch, courting new clients, managing existing relationships, and essentially running the day-to-day operations of our high net worth division. My typical day started at 6:30 a.m. when I'd arrive at the office, always the first one there. I'd spend the pre-market hours analyzing overnight news, reviewing Asian markets, and preparing briefings for clients before the opening bell. During market hours, I was constantly on the phone with clients, executing trades, managing risk, and putting out fires. After the market closed, I'd spend hours preparing detailed reports, updating financial plans, and cold calling potential clients. I rarely left the office before 9 p.m., and weekends were just quieter workdays. While my college friends were getting married, traveling, and building their personal lives, I was building other people's wealth and making the Morrison family very, very rich. Let me give you some concrete numbers that still make my blood boil. In my first year, I brought in $12 million in new assets under management. My second year, $18 million. By my 4th year, I was personally responsible for managing $120 million in client assets and had generated over $3.2 million in fees for the company. My client retention rate was 99.2%, in an industry where 85% is considered excellent. But here's the kicker. While I was generating millions for Morrison Financial, my salary had only increased by 12% over 4 years. Meanwhile, I watched as Richard Morrison Jr., let's call him Dick, because that's exactly what he was, hired his fraternity brothers, his golf buddies, and his wife's sorority sisters into senior positions at salaries that made my eyes water. Dick had inherited the company when his father died in 2019, and from day one, it was clear he saw the business as his personal playground rather than a serious financial institution. This was a man who wore custom-tailored suits that cost more than my monthly rent, drove a different luxury car every day of the week, and had never actually managed a client portfolio in his life. But Dick wasn't just incompetent, he was manipulative. He had this way of making promises that kept me hooked like a fish on a line. "Sarah, you're the backbone of this operation," he'd tell me during my annual reviews. "I'm planning to expand our executive team next year, and you're at the top of my list for senior vice president. You just need to keep doing what you're doing." So I did. I kept doing what I was doing, and more. I took on additional responsibilities without additional compensation. I worked through holidays, missed family gatherings, and put my personal life on hold because I believed, truly believed, that my hard work would eventually be rewarded. I should have seen the warning signs. Like when Dick hired his college roommate Brad as a senior investment advisor, despite the fact that Brad had never worked in finance and had been selling insurance in Ohio for the past 5 years. Or when he brought in Kevin, another fraternity brother, as director of client relations, a position that involved taking clients to expensive dinners and golf outings, while I did all the actual financial planning. The most infuriating part was watching these men take credit for my work. I'd spend weeks preparing a comprehensive financial plan for a high-net-worth client, only to watch Brad present it in the client meeting as if he'd crafted every detail. I'd identify investment opportunities that generated 6-figure returns, only to hear Dick casually mention to other partners that his strategic vision had led to these successes. But I kept my mouth shut and my head down because Dick had promised me that promotion. Senior vice president came with a corner office, a 6-figure salary increase, and most importantly, equity in the company. It was everything I'd worked for. The company's growth during my tenure was nothing short of spectacular. When I started, Morrison Financial managed $400 million in assets. By 2023, we were approaching $900 million, and I could directly attribute at least 60% of that growth to my efforts. I had relationships with everyone from tech entrepreneurs to old money families, from small business owners building their retirement, funds to celebrities looking for discreet wealth management. I knew every client's risk tolerance, their family situations, their long-term goals, and their personal quirks. Mrs. Henderson always wanted her portfolio updates delivered on paper, never email. Mr. Rodriguez called every Tuesday at 2 p.m. for a market update. The Carlyle family insisted on ESG investments only. These weren't just accounts to me, they were relationships I'd nurtured for years. But despite all of this, despite being the highest performing advisor in the company's history, I was still stuck in the same cramped office I'd started in, still fighting for every dollar of commission, still waiting for that promised promotion that seemed to move further away each year. The betrayal came on March 15, 2023, a date that's burned into my memory forever. It should have been one of the happiest days of my life, but instead it became the day my entire world crumbled. My husband Jake and I had been trying to conceive for almost 3 years. We'd gone through fertility treatments, suffered 2 miscarriages, and spent thousands of dollars on specialists. When we finally got pregnant and made it past the first trimester, we were over the moon. At 12 weeks, we felt safe enough to start sharing the news with family and close friends. I'd planned to tell Dick first thing that morning. After all, I'd need to eventually discuss maternity leave policies and how to handle my clients during my absence. I was nervous but excited. Surely. He'd be happy for me, right? I knocked on Dick's corner office door at exactly 9 a.m., armed with a plan for how to manage my accounts during my leave and a proposal for gradual responsibilities handover. I'd even prepared a presentation showing how my pregnancy timeline would have minimal impact on our busy season. "Come in," Dick called, not looking up from his computer screen where he was scrolling through what looked like a golf equipment website. "Good morning, Dick. I have some wonderful news to share with you." He finally looked up, his expression already showing mild annoyance at being interrupted from his online shopping. "What is it, Sarah? I've got a tea time at 11. I took a deep breath, my heart racing with excitement and nerves. "I'm pregnant! Jake and I are expecting our first child in October." The silence that followed was deafening. Dick's face didn't light up with congratulations or even polite acknowledgement. Instead, his expression darkened, his jaw clenched, and he leaned back in his $5,000 leather chair with a look of pure disgust that I'll never forget. "Well, that's just fantastic," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm thick enough to cut with a knife. "Absolutely perfect timing, Sarah. Right when we're entering our busiest quarter, right when the Henderson Group is considering doubling their investment, right when I need my top performers to be at 110%. I stood there, stunned into silence. This wasn't the reaction I'd expected. Not even close. "I guess I know who won't be pulling their weight around here anymore," he continued, standing up and walking around his desk like a predator circling wounded prey. "Let me guess. You'll be calling in sick with morning sickness, leaving early for doctor's appointments, and generally being distracted by your condition." The word condition rolled off his tongue like it was something disgusting. I tried to find my voice, to defend myself, to explain that I was perfectly capable of continuing my work. Dick, I'm only 12 weeks along. I'll be working for another 6 months, and I've already started planning how to— Let's be brutally honest here, Sarah, he interrupted, his voice getting louder and more aggressive. Pregnant women are a liability in this business. You're going to be distracted, unreliable, and emotional. Our clients don't want to deal with someone who might burst into tears during a market downturn or who's more concerned about nursery furniture than their portfolio performance. Each word hit me like a physical blow. I could feel my face burning with shame and anger, but I tried to maintain my professionalism. I've never missed a deadline, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I've never let my personal life interfere. With my work, my track record speaks for itself. Dick laughed, actually laughed, a cold, cruel sound that echoed off his office walls. Your track record is about to take a nosedive, sweetheart. Here's what's going to happen, and this is non-negotiable. He walked back to his desk and pulled out a legal pad, writing as he spoke. I'm reassigning your major accounts to Brad and Kevin. The Henderson Group, the Rodriguez Portfolio, the Carlyle Family Trust, all of it. You can handle the smaller clients, the ones with less than $500,000 in assets. Consider it light duty for your delicate condition. My blood ran cold. The accounts he was mentioning represented not just 60% of my annual commission, but relationships I'd built over years. These weren't just numbers on a spreadsheet. They were people who trusted me with their life savings, their children's college funds, their retirement dreams. You can't do this, I said, my voice stronger now, fueled by desperation and disbelief. Those clients chose to work with me specifically. You can't just— Watch me, Dick snapped, his eyes flashing with cruel satisfaction. I'm the CEO of this company, Sarah. I make the decisions about who handles what accounts. And right now, I'm deciding that a pregnant woman can't be trusted with our most valuable clients. He sat back down and looked at me with mock concern. Don't worry, you'll still have a job. You can handle the small accounts, answer phones, maybe do some filing, light administrative work that won't tax your delicate condition. The humiliation was overwhelming. In the span of 10 minutes, I'd gone from being the company's top performer to being treated like I was mentally incapacitated. And Sarah? Dick added as I turned to leave, his voice taking on an even more sinister tone. Maybe next time think twice before getting knocked up when you have professional responsibilities. Some of us actually take our careers seriously. I somehow made it back to my desk without collapsing, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold my coffee cup. As I sat there trying to process what had just happened, I heard Dick on a phone call with his wife, his voice loud enough to carry across the office. You won't believe this, honey. Sarah just told me she's pregnant. Can you believe the timing? I guess we know who's definitely not getting that VP position now. Honestly, these women think they can have it all. Career, family, success. Someone should have told her you can't serve two masters. That's when the full reality hit me. The vice president position I'd been promised, the promotion I'd sacrificed everything for, the equity stake I dreamed about, none of it was ever going to be mine. Not because I wasn't qualified, not because I hadn't earned it, but because Dick Morrison saw me as nothing more than a walking uterus who had inconveniently forgotten her place in his boys' club. But the betrayal went even deeper than that. Over the next few days, as word spread through the office, I discovered just how orchestrated this humiliation was. Linda from HR, who'd been with the company since Dick's father ran it, quietly pulled me aside to inform me that I'd need to start documenting my performance issues related to my pregnancy. What performance issues? I asked, genuinely confused. Well, Linda said, consulting a folder she'd apparently prepared in advance. There's been concern about your focus lately. Some missed deadlines, client complaints about your availability. I stared at her in disbelief. Linda, I haven't missed a single deadline. My client satisfaction scores are the highest in the company. She shrugged uncomfortably. This is just what I've been told to document. It's company policy when an employee's performance might be affected by personal circumstances. It was all becoming clear. Dick wasn't just discriminating against me, he was building a paper trail to justify it. They were actively rewriting history to make it look like my pregnancy had somehow affected my performance, even though I'd been outperforming everyone else in the company for years. I spent that night lying awake, staring at the ceiling while Jake slept beside me. When I finally told him what had happened, he was furious, angrier than I'd ever seen him. "Sue the bastard," he said immediately. "That's textbook pregnancy discrimination. It's illegal, it's documented, and you have witnesses." But I knew it wouldn't be that simple. Dick was too smart to put his discriminatory views in writing, and he had the power, the connections, and the money to drag out any legal battle until we were financially ruined. Plus, he was already building a case against me, rewriting my performance history to justify his actions. Still, I had to try something. I couldn't just roll over and accept this injustice. The next morning, I requested a formal meeting with Dick and Linda from HR. I'd spent the night preparing my case, printing out performance reviews, client testimonials, and revenue reports. That proved my value to the company. "I think there's been a serious misunderstanding," I began, spreading my documents across the conference table. "My pregnancy doesn't affect my ability to manage my accounts. In fact, my performance metrics show—" "Sarah," Dick interrupted, not even glancing at my carefully prepared evidence, "I've made my decision. It's what's best for the company, and frankly, it's what's best for you too. You should be grateful I'm not just putting you on unpaid leave immediately." I looked to Linda for support, hoping that as the HR director, she'd at least acknowledge the legal implications of what was happening. Instead, she sat there like a stone statue, occasionally nodding at Dick's words. "This is illegal," I said, my voice gaining strength. "You're discriminating against me based on my pregnancy, and you're retaliating against me for announcing it." Dick leaned forward across the table, his eyes cold and calculating. "Prove it, Sarah. Show me where I said anything discriminatory. Show me where I did anything other than make sound business decisions about account management." The smugness in his voice was infuriating. He knew exactly what he was doing, and he knew how difficult it would be for me to prove discrimination without explicit evidence. "I have witnesses," I said desperately. "People heard you making comments about pregnant women being liabilities." "Hearsay," Dick replied with a dismissive wave. "Besides, I was simply expressing concern about how pregnancy might affect work performance. That's a legitimate business consideration." Linda finally spoke up, her voice carefully neutral. "Sarah, I think you're overreacting to what was simply a discussion about workload management during your pregnancy. Mr. Morrison is actually being quite accommodating by allowing you to continue working in a reduced capacity." I stared at her in disbelief. She was actually helping him gaslight me, making it sound like this devastating demotion was some kind of favor. "Furthermore," Linda continued, consulting her notes, "there have been some concerns about your recent performance that we need to address." "What concerns?" I demanded. She began reading from a list that had apparently materialized overnight. Failure to respond promptly to client emails, missing scheduled check-in calls, showing up late to meetings. "That's not true," I said, my voice rising. "I can prove every one of those claims is false." "It's documented," Linda said firmly. "And given your current condition, we think it's best to reduce your responsibilities to prevent any further performance issues." It was masterful, really. They'd created a narrative where my pregnancy wasn't the reason for my demotion. My supposed performance issues were. Issues that had conveniently appeared right after I announced my pregnancy, but that Linda was now treating as historical fact. As I left that meeting, I heard Linda quietly tell Dick, "Don't worry, I'll make sure everything is properly documented. If she tries to make trouble, we'll have plenty of evidence that this was a performance-based decision." They weren't just discriminating against me, they were actively covering their tracks and building a case to justify their actions. I was being systematically erased from the company I'd helped build. That evening, I sat in my home office surrounded by 6 years of my professional life, performance reviews that praised my exceptional client relationships, and outstanding revenue generation, commission statements that showed my steady climb from rookie advisor to top performer, and thank you notes from clients whose financial dreams I'd helped make reality. Every document told the same story. I was not just good at my job, I was exceptional. I had built something meaningful at Morrison Financial, created value that went far beyond mere numbers on a balance sheet. And yet, the moment I announced that I was carrying a child, I became disposable in Dick's eyes. I cried until I had no tears left. Then I got angry, angrier than I'd ever been in my life. Then finally, I got strategic. The turning point came when I was looking through my client files and remembered something my mentor from business school, Professor Margaret Chen, had told me during a lecture on entrepreneurship. Sarah, in the financial services industry, relationships are everything. Products are commodities, but trust is priceless. If you ever find yourself in a situation where your employer doesn't value you, remember that your clients aren't loyal to the company. They're loyal to you. That's when Dick's fatal error became crystal clear to me. In his arrogance and his rush to punish me for daring to get pregnant, he'd forgotten something crucial. Those clients he was so casually reassigning weren't really Morrison Financial's clients. They were mine. I had found them, courted them, guided them through market crashes and personal crises. I knew their children's names, remembered their wedding anniversaries, and had earned their trust through years of consistent performance and personal attention. More importantly, many of my clients were successful business people themselves. They understood the value of talent and loyalty, and they'd seen firsthand how Dick operated. Some had even made subtle comments over the years about their preference for working with me rather than the boss's son. I opened my laptop and started making lists. Not just of my clients, but of everything I knew about Morrison Financial's operations, their weaknesses, their dependencies, their inefficiencies. I cataloged every process I'd developed, every system I'd streamlined, every relationship I'd built. But most importantly, I started researching exactly what my legal rights were as a pregnant employee and what options I had for starting my own financial advisory firm. That's when I discovered something that made me smile for the first time in days. In his haste to keep me under his control with promises of future equity, Dick had never made me sign a non-compete agreement. The standard employment contract I'd signed 6 years earlier as a junior analyst had no restrictive covenants, no client non-solicitation clauses, no barriers to competition. Dick had been so confident in his power over me, so sure that I'd never have the courage or resources to strike out on my own, that he'd never bothered to legally protect himself from exactly the scenario I was now contemplating. If Dick thought pregnancy made me weak and distracted, I was about to show him just how dangerous an underestimated woman with nothing left to lose could be. While I was quietly planning my escape and eventual revenge, Dick was living in a fantasy world where his brilliance had solved all his problems. Within a week of our confrontation, he'd already started taking credit for my client, relationships and company meetings. I watched from my newly marginalized desk. I'd been moved from my office to a cubicle in what Dick called the restructuring necessary for your new role, as he held court in the conference room, bragging about his strategic vision that had secured major accounts. The Henderson Group deal was all about relationship management, I heard him tell a room full of junior advisors during the weekly team meeting. You have to understand what drives these high-net-worth individuals. It's not just about returns, it's about trust, about understanding their long-term goals. I nearly choked on my coffee. The Henderson Group deal had taken me 8 months to close. I'd attended their daughter's wedding, spent countless hours understanding their philanthropic goals, and crafted a complex estate planning strategy that saved them millions in taxes. Dick had met Mr. Henderson exactly twice, both times at golf. Outings I'd arranged, but the junior advisors hung on his every word, taking notes about relationship-building strategies that Dick had learned from watching me work for years. Meanwhile, Brad and Kevin, the fraternity brothers who'd inherited my major accounts, were struggling spectacularly. Without my detailed client notes and relationship insights, they were flying blind. I watched with grim satisfaction as they fumbled through client meetings, clearly unprepared and obviously out of their depth. Kevin called me 3 days after taking over the Rodriguez account, panic evident in his voice. "Sarah, I'm having trouble reaching Mrs. Rodriguez. Do you know the best time to call her?" I smiled sweetly. "Did you check her client file? All her preferences should be documented there." "Well, yeah, but the notes are kind of sparse." Of course they were sparse. My real client notes, the ones that detailed Mrs. Rodriguez's preference for afternoon calls, Her concerns about her son's gambling problem and her weekly Tuesday morning yoga classes were in my personal files, not the company database. "I'm sure you'll figure it out," I said. "After all, Dick seems very confident in your abilities." Brad was having even more trouble. The Carlyle family, who insisted on ESG investments only, had specifically requested a meeting with me after learning about the account transfer. When Brad couldn't explain the difference between ESG and SRI investing during their call, they'd demanded to speak with someone who actually understands our values. Dick, meanwhile, seemed oblivious to these warning signs. He was too busy enjoying his perceived victory over me and planning his next golf outing with potential clients he'd never actually closed deals with. 2 weeks after my demotion, he walked by my cubicle with a group of visiting investors, speaking loudly enough for me to hear. "We've had to do some restructuring recently, moving some of our team members into roles that better suit their current capabilities." He glanced at me meaningfully, his message clear. I was damaged goods, relegated to lesser duties because of my pregnancy. If only he knew what I was really doing during those quiet hours at my cubicle. 3 months into my pregnancy, I was showing enough that my condition was obvious to everyone in the office. Dick had started making increasingly snide comments about my expanding responsibilities and suggesting that I might want to consider starting my maternity leave early for the good of the company. What he didn't know was that I'd spent those 3 months methodically documenting every discriminatory comment, every instance of retaliation, every policy violation, but more importantly, I'd been having very discreet conversations with my former clients. You see, while Dick was busy playing golf and taking credit for my work, I'd been having lunch meetings with the CEOs, CFOs, and family patriarchs I'd served for years. These weren't formal business meetings. They were personal conversations with people who'd become friends over the years of managing their wealth. "Sarah, I have to ask," Mr. Henderson said during one of these lunches. "What's really going on at Morrison Financial? Kevin seems like a nice enough kid, but he doesn't seem to understand our account at all." I chose my words carefully. "There have been some changes in how accounts are managed. I'm sure Kevin will get up to speed eventually. But you're still with the company, right? I mean, we've been working together for 4 years. I trust your judgment." "Actually," I said, leaning forward slightly, "I've been thinking about some changes myself. Hypothetically speaking, what would you think about working with me if I started my own advisory firm?" The response was immediate and overwhelming. "Sarah, if you started your own firm, I'd follow you in a heartbeat. You're the one who's been managing our money all along anyway." Similar conversations were happening across my entire client base. The Rodriguez family, the Carlyles, the tech entrepreneurs I'd helped through IPOs, the small business owners planning for retirement, all of them expressed the same sentiment. Their loyalty was to me, not to Morrison Financial. But here's where it gets really interesting. 3 of my largest clients, successful entrepreneurs themselves, didn't just want to follow me to a new firm. They wanted to invest in it. "Sarah," said Marcus Webb, founder of a successful tech startup whose portfolio I'd been managing since his company went public. "I've watched you work for years. You're brilliant, you're ethical, and you understand this business better than anyone I've met. If you're serious about starting your own firm, I want to be your first investor." Within 6 weeks of these conversations, I had secured $3.2 million in seed funding and commitments from clients representing over $180 million in assets under management. I'd found office space, hired a compliance officer, and was in the final stages of getting my own RIA, Registered Investment Advisor license. The beauty of my plan was its simplicity. I wasn't stealing clients or violating any agreements. I was simply giving people who'd expressed dissatisfaction with their current service the opportunity to work with someone they trusted. Phoenix Financial, named for my rise from the ashes of Dick's discrimination, was officially incorporated on July 15, 2023. My due date was October 12th, which gave me almost 3 months to get everything set up before my maternity leave, but I wasn't ready to tip my hand yet. I wanted the moment of revelation to be perfect. 2 weeks into August, I submitted my maternity leave paperwork. Dick barely looked up from his computer when I placed it on his desk. 12 weeks, huh?" he said dismissively, not even bothering to read the forms. Don't be surprised if some things change while you're gone. Business doesn't stop for biology, and we need people who can commit fully to their responsibilities. Of course, I replied sweetly. I completely understand. Business comes first. What Dick didn't understand was that I'd spent the last 4 months not just planning my exit, but positioning myself to devastate his business in the process, on Xiao. August 30th, my last day before maternity leave, I sent a carefully crafted email to all my former clients. The subject line was simple: important update regarding your account. The email explained that I was starting my own financial advisory firm and would be honored to continue serving their financial needs in this new capacity. I attached detailed information about Phoenix Financial, our service model, and our fee structure, which was 25% lower than Morrison Financial's rates. I sent the email at 5:47 p.m. on a Friday, knowing that most clients would see it over the weekend, when they had time to consider their options. By Monday morning, my phone was ringing nonstop. The first call came from Kevin, Dick's fraternity brother, at 7:23 a.m. Sarah, thank God you answered. The Henderson Group called this morning. They're pulling their entire account. They said they want to work with you directly at your new firm. What the hell is going on? I was at home, 8 months pregnant, sitting in the nursery I'd been preparing for my daughter. I'm on maternity leave, Kevin. Shouldn't you be handling client relations now? But you can't just steal our clients. You work for Morrison Financial. Actually, Kevin, I'm not stealing anyone. I'm simply providing an option for people who've expressed dissatisfaction with their current service. And as of Friday, I no longer work for Morrison Financial. I'm an independent advisor now. But you signed a non-compete. You can't do this. I smiled, even though he couldn't see me. You might want to check my employment file, Kevin. Dick was so confident in his control over me that he never made me sign a non-compete agreement. Funny how arrogance makes people overlook important details. The famous calls kept coming throughout the day. Brad called about the Rodriguez account. Linda from HR called, trying to sound authoritative but failing to hide her panic. Junior advisors called asking if there were any openings at Phoenix Financial. Finally, at 3:47 p.m., Dick himself called. I could practically hear him grinding his teeth through the phone. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he screamed before I could even say hello. "I'm preparing for the arrival of my daughter," I replied calmly, patting my belly. "What are you doing, Dick?" "You know damn well what I'm talking about. Half my client base called today saying they're leaving." "Your client base? That's interesting, because I seem to remember you telling me that pregnant women can't be trusted with important clients. Why would you care about accounts you didn't think I was capable of handling?" There was silence on the other end of the line. "Here's what's happening, Dick," I continued, my voice steady and calm. "I'm starting my own firm. It's called Phoenix Financial, risen from the ashes of your discrimination. I have funding, I have office space, I have a team, and yes, I have clients. Clients who chose to work with me, not with the company that treated me like a disposable asset. You can't do this. This is corporate theft. I'll sue you for everything you're worth." "With what evidence? Your discriminatory comments? The way you illegally demoted me based on my pregnancy? The hostile work environment you created? Please, by all means, let's go to court. I have 4 months of documentation. And my employment? Lawyer is very eager to file a pregnancy discrimination suit." I heard him talking to someone in the background, probably Linda from HR, before coming back to the phone. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I want you to experience what it feels like to have your career destroyed by someone who underestimated you. I want you to know that your company is failing because you chose bigotry over talent. I want you to understand that the liability you mocked is now your biggest competitor." "This isn't over," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "You're right," I replied. "It's just beginning." My daughter Emma was born on October 8th, 2023, 4 days early and absolutely perfect. While I was in the hospital holding my beautiful baby girl, Phoenix Financial was processing the paperwork for $200 million in transferred assets. By the time I returned from maternity leave 12 weeks later, we'd grown to 12 employees and were managing $280 million in client assets. Morrison Financial, meanwhile, had lost nearly 50% of their client base and was hemorrhaging money. The business world is smaller than you might think, especially in wealth management. Word spreads quickly about firms that are struggling, and Morrison Financial's problems became an open secret in our industry. Their best employees started jumping ship, taking their remaining clients with them. Dick was forced to lay off half his staff, including Brad and Kevin. Turns out, when you can't rely on someone else's work to make you look good, your own inadequacies become pretty obvious pretty quickly. But the sweetest revenge came 6 months after Emma's birth. Morrison Financial's financial situation had become so desperate that Dick was forced to seek a buyer for the company. After 36 years in business, the firm his father had built was going to be sold for parts. That's when I made my move. Phoenix. Financial had grown rapidly, but we needed more office space, more infrastructure, and more established client relationships to compete with the larger firms in our market. Morrison Financial, despite its problems, still had valuable assets: their office building, their compliance systems, and about $300 million in remaining client assets. I submitted a bid to acquire Morrison Financial Solutions. The closing meeting was held in the same conference room where Dick had humiliated me 18 months earlier. I walked in 8 months postpartum, wearing a tailored suit that fit perfectly, carrying a leather briefcase that contained the contracts that would make me the owner of my former employer. Dick was already there, looking like he'd aged 10 years. In the past 6 months. His expensive suits had been replaced by off-the-rack clothing, his arrogant posture had devolved into a defeated slouch, and his eyes held the hollow look of a man who'd lost everything. "Hello, Dick," I said pleasantly, taking a seat at the head of the table, the same spot where he'd sat when he'd demoted me. "Sarah," he replied, unable to meet my eyes. The meeting was purely procedural. My lawyers presented the acquisition terms. His lawyers reviewed them, and within 2 hours, I owned Morrison Financial Solutions. "There is one more matter to discuss," I said as we were wrapping up. "The current management structure." Dick looked up hopefully. Despite everything, he apparently still believed he might have a place in the new organization. "Unfortunately," I continued, "Phoenix Financial already has a CEO. However, we are looking for a junior advisor to handle some of our smaller accounts, clients with less than $500,000 in assets. You know, light administrative work that won't tax your capabilities." The irony wasn't lost on anyone in the room. I was offering Dick the exact same demotion he'd given me, using his own words against him. Dick's face went through a spectrum of emotions: shock, anger, humiliation, and finally, desperate resignation. "Sarah, please. I know I made mistakes, but I have a family, a mortgage." "So did I interrupted gently. "The difference is, I was actually good at my job." He took the position. What choice did he have? The integration of Morrison Financial into Phoenix Financial took 6 months. During that time, I watched Dick struggle with the same feelings of powerlessness and humiliation that I'd experienced. The difference was, his demotion was based on actual performance issues, not pregnancy discrimination. He lasted 8 months, as a junior advisor before quitting. His final day, he stopped by my office, the same corner office that had once been his. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "For what I said, for how I treated you. You were right to leave, and you were right to compete with us. I didn't think you'd actually do it. That was your mistake, Dick. You underestimated me from day one. You saw a pregnant woman instead of a talented advisor. You saw someone to control instead of someone to respect." He nodded, looking older than his 55 years. "For what?" "It's worth. You've built something impressive here. Your father would have been proud of what you've accomplished." After he left, I sat in my office looking out at the trading floor where my team was hard at work. Phoenix Financial now managed over $450 million in assets, employed 23 people, and had a client satisfaction rating of 97%. We'd been featured in Forbes, Financial Planning Magazine, and Investment News as one of the fastest-growing advisory firms in the country. But the real victory wasn't the money or the recognition. The real victory was proving to myself that I was worth more than the limitations others tried to place on me. Emma, now a toddler, spent her days in the company daycare we'd established on the second floor of our building. Our employees loved having her around, and our clients adored seeing her pictures during video calls. Far from being a liability, my motherhood had made me more relatable to clients, more understanding of their needs to balance family and financial security. I'd learned that sometimes the best revenge isn't about destroying your enemy, it's about becoming so successful that they become irrelevant. The ripple effects of Dick's discrimination went far beyond just losing his company. Word spreads quickly in the financial services industry, and Dick's treatment of a pregnant employee became a cautionary tale that followed him everywhere. When he tried to get hired at other firms, HR departments would quietly make calls to former Morrison Financial employees. The story always came out: how he discriminated against his top performer, how he'd lost half his client base because of his prejudice, how his company had collapsed because he'd driven away talent. No reputable firm wanted to hire someone with that kind of liability. Dick eventually had to leave the financial services industry entirely, taking a job selling commercial real estate, a significant step down from CEO of a wealth management firm. Meanwhile, Brad and Kevin, the fraternity brothers who'd benefited from Dick's discrimination, found themselves unemployable in our industry as well. Word had gotten out about how they'd been given client accounts they couldn't manage, how they'd fumbled relationships that had taken years to build. Their association with Morrison Financial's collapse made them toxic in the job market. Linda from HR, who'd helped orchestrate the cover-up of Dick's discrimination, was let go during the acquisition. At 58 years old, with a reputation for enabling discriminatory practices, she found it nearly impossible to find another HR position. She eventually took early retirement, her pension significantly reduced due to Morrison Financial's financial troubles. But perhaps the most satisfying consequence was watching the culture of the new Phoenix Financial flourish in ways that Morrison Financial never could under Dick's leadership. We implemented a comprehensive parental leave policy: 16 weeks paid for primary caregivers, 8 weeks for partners. We offered flexible work arrangements, on-site childcare, and lactation support. 3 of our female advisors had babies during our first 2 years, and in each case, their productivity actually increased after returning from maternity leave. Because they felt supported and valued, our company culture attracted top talent from across the industry. People wanted to work for a firm that actually valued their employees, that promoted based on merit rather than connections, that didn't see pregnancy as a liability, but as one of many life experiences that made advisors more relatable to clients. 6. Months after the acquisition, I received a call from the Department of Labor. They were investigating Morrison Financial for potential EEOC violations based on complaints from former employees. It turned out I wasn't the only woman Dick had discriminated against. There were 3 other cases of pregnant employees being demoted or pushed out of the company. The investigation resulted in a $2.3 million settlement paid by Morrison Financial's insurance carrier. As the primary complainant, I received the largest portion of the settlement, which I used to establish a scholarship fund for women pursuing careers in financial services. But the real justice came in the form of systemic change. The Morrison Financial case became a teaching example in business schools and legal seminars. HR departments across the industry began reviewing their pregnancy discrimination policies, and several major firms implemented new training programs to prevent similar situations. Beyond the professional success and financial vindication, the most profound change was in how I saw myself and my worth. For years at Morrison Financial, I'd internalized the message that I needed to prove myself constantly, that I should be grateful for whatever opportunities I was given, that speaking up about unfair treatment would mark me as a troublemaker. I'd accepted being overworked and underpaid because I believed that was the price of eventually getting ahead. Dick's discrimination, as painful as it was, forced me to confront the reality that no amount of hard work would ever be enough for someone who saw me as inherently less valuable because of my gender and reproductive capacity. It freed me from the illusion that if I just worked harder, if I just proved myself more, I'd eventually get the respect I deserved. Starting Phoenix Financial taught me that I didn't need anyone's permission to be successful. I didn't need to wait for someone else to recognize my worth. I could create my own opportunities, build my own company, and define success on my own terms. The experience also changed how I approached relationships with clients and employees. Having been on the receiving end of discrimination, I became hyper-aware of power dynamics and committed to creating an environment where everyone could thrive regardless of their personal circumstances. When Maria, one of our junior advisors, got pregnant 2 years after joining the firm, she was terrified to tell me. She'd heard stories from friends at other companies about how pregnancy announcements were career killers. "Sarah," she said nervously during our one-on-one meeting, "I have something to tell you, and I hope it won't affect my standing here." "Maria, whatever it is, we'll figure it out together. I'm pregnant. I know the timing isn't great with the Henderson expansion project, but I promise I won't let it affect my work." I held up my hand to stop her. "Maria, congratulations. That's wonderful news. Now let's talk about how we can support you and make sure you have everything you need to be successful both as an advisor and as a mom." The relief in her eyes reminded me of how different things could be when leadership actually cared about their employees as human beings. Maria took 4 months of maternity leave, returned on a flexible schedule that allowed her to work from home 2 days a week, and within a year of returning had closed the largest single account in Phoenix Financial's history. Her client, a successful entrepreneur and mother of 3, specifically chose to work with Maria because she understood the challenges of balancing career and family. The Phoenix Financial story became legendary in wealth management circles, but not just as a tale of personal revenge. It became a case study in how discrimination doesn't just hurt individuals, it devastates businesses. I was invited to speak at industry conferences about building inclusive workplace cultures. My presentation, "The Cost of Discrimination: How Bias Destroyed a $900 million Firm," became one of the most requested sessions at financial services events. The core message was simple. When you discriminate against talented employees, you don't just lose their contributions. You often lose them to competitors who will value what you rejected. Several major firms reached out to consult with Phoenix Financial about implementing family-friendly policies. We helped develop parental leave programs, flexible work arrangements, and career development paths that didn't penalize employees for having children. The industry publication Financial Advisor magazine featured Phoenix Financial on their cover, with the headline, "How One Woman's Fight Against Discrimination Created a $500 million Success Story." The article detailed not just my personal journey, but the broader impact on industry practices. Sarah Peterson didn't just build a successful firm, the article concluded. She proved that companies that embrace diversity and inclusion don't just do the right thing. They outperform companies that don't. 3 years after founding Phoenix Financial, I was invited to testify before a congressional subcommittee on workplace discrimination. My testimony focused on how pregnancy discrimination doesn't just harm individual women. It weakens the entire economy by driving talented people out of industries where they could make valuable contributions. When companies like Morrison Financial discriminate against pregnant employees, I told the committee, they're not just violating the law, they're making a catastrophic business mistake. They're telling their most dedicated employees that loyalty and performance matter less than reproductive status. They're creating a culture where talent is wasted and potential is squandered. The hearing led to increased funding for EEOC enforcement and new guidelines for how companies should handle pregnancy-related workplace issues. 2.5 years after the acquisition of Morrison Financial, I received an unexpected phone call from Dick's wife, Patricia. "Sarah, I hope you don't mind me calling," she said hesitantly. "I got your number from your assistant. I wanted to talk to you about Richard." I was curious but cautious. "Of course, Patricia. How can I help you?" "He's been struggling since everything happened with the company. Depression, anxiety, financial stress. But lately he's been talking about what he learned from the whole experience, about how wrong he was about working mothers, about women in business in general." She paused, clearly choosing her words carefully. "He's been volunteering with a nonprofit that helps women start small businesses. He wanted me to ask if you'd be willing to meet with him. Not for a job. He knows that ship has sailed, but because he wants to make amends. Real amends, not just words." I was surprised by the request, but something in Patricia's voice made me agree to the meeting. We met at a coffee shop downtown, far from the financial district where we'd both once worked. Dick looked different, older, humbler, wearing a simple polo shirt instead of his usual expensive suits. "Thank you for agreeing to see me," he began. "I know I don't deserve your time after what I put you through." "What do you want, Dick?" He took a deep breath. "I want to tell you that you were right. About everything. I was wrong to discriminate against you, wrong to underestimate you, wrong to think that being pregnant made you less capable. I was wrong about a lot of things." "Okay," I said, waiting for the real purpose of the meeting. "I've been working with women entrepreneurs through the Small Business Development Center," he continued, "helping them write business plans, understand financial projections, navigate the challenges of starting a company. And every time I meet with these women, many of them mothers trying to build something for their families, I think about what I said to you, about how I treated you." He looked directly at me for the first time since we'd sat down. "I destroyed my own company because I couldn't see past my prejudices. I lost everything because I was too arrogant to recognize talent when it was right in front of me. But more importantly, I hurt you at a time when you should have been celebrated, and I'm sorry. I'm truly, deeply sorry." It wasn't the apology I'd expected, and it caught me off guard with its apparent sincerity. "The women I work with now," he continued, "they remind me that business success isn't about who fits some narrow definition of what a leader should look like. It's about who has the vision, the determination, and the skills to build something meaningful. You had all of that, and I was too blind to see it." We talked for another hour. Dick told me about his volunteer work, about the women-owned businesses he'd helped launch, about the perspective he'd gained from losing everything. I told him about Phoenix Financial's growth, about our company culture, about how becoming a mother had actually made me a better advisor and leader. When we parted ways, he shook my hand and said, "I know I can never undo the hurt I caused you, but I want you to know that your success and my failure taught me more about leadership and humanity than 30 years in business ever did." As I sit here today, 5 years after that devastating conversation in Dick's office, I can honestly say that his discrimination against me was the catalyst for the greatest success of my life. Phoenix Financial now manages over $750 million in assets, employs 43 people, and has been recognized as one of the top workplaces in our state for 3 consecutive years. We've helped thousands of families achieve their financial goals, and we've done it while proving that companies can be both profitable and humane. Emma is now 5 years old and loves coming to Mommy's office, where she's treated like a princess by our entire team. She's already showing signs of her mother's determination and her father's analytical mind. When she grows up, she'll enter a workplace that's more equitable than the one I faced, in part because of the stand I took against discrimination. But the real lesson isn't about revenge at all. It's about recognizing your own worth and refusing to let others define your potential. For years, I let Dick Morrison's promises keep me trapped in a situation where I was undervalued and exploited. I believed that if I just worked harder, if I just proved myself more, I'd eventually get the recognition I deserved. His discrimination forced me to confront the truth. Some people will never see your worth, no matter how much you achieve. The moment I stopped seeking validation from someone who didn't value me and started believing in my own capabilities was the moment everything changed. I didn't just build a business. I built a life where my success wasn't dependent on anyone else's approval. Dick Morrison thought he was punishing me for getting pregnant. Instead, he freed me from the limitations I'd accepted for too long. Thought he was protecting his company from a liability. Instead, he handed his biggest competitive advantage to a rival who knew exactly how to use it. The sweetest part of this revenge wasn't watching Dick lose his company. It was proving to myself that I was capable of building something better than anything he ever could have offered me. To any woman reading this who's facing discrimination, who's being told she's asking for too much, or that her ambitions don't fit someone else's narrow definition of appropriate, you are worth more than their limitations. Your dreams are valid, your skills are valuable, and your potential is limitless. Don't wait for permission to be great. Don't accept less than you deserve because someone else is uncomfortable with your success. And remember that the people who underestimate you are often the ones who are most surprised when you prove them wrong, and that's how I served them a dish they never saw coming. Sometimes the sweetest treat is justice. What did you think of this serving of revenge? Would you have done anything differently? Or do you have a story where you had to cook up your own revenge treat? Have you ever been so underestimated that you had to prove everyone wrong? Have you ever turned discrimination into motivation to build something amazing? Dish it out in the comments below. I read them all, and I love hearing your stories of triumph over adversity. If you enjoyed this story and are hungry for more tales where the bill always comes due, make sure to devour that like button, subscribe to Revenge Treats, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next serving. Thanks for joining us at Revenge Treats, where payback is always on the menu. And sometimes the most satisfying revenge is becoming so successful that your enemies become footnotes in your success story.